Well, there's no denying it. The world is getting smaller. And as it does, some major aspects of life are affected. We saw today Germany refusing to bail out Greece in what has become a serious financial crisis there. This is a sign that puts the globalization process in Europe into question. Joining me now from Austin, Texas, is radio host Alex Jones. Hey there, Alex. I'm curious what you think about all this and what implications you think that this could have.
Thanks for having me on. Look, the private central banks of the world that just met in secret 3 weeks ago, the major newspapers in Australia reported on this, have been caught over and over again in their own white papers. Back in 2002, it came out that the IMF and World Bank do what everybody already knew they were doing, but here it was in their own documents. They go into third world countries, first world countries, developing nations, the old world. It doesn't matter. Russia, the U.S., Argentina, Nigeria, Greece, Iceland, they're predators. And they come in and they get their executives in place in the government. They buy off the politicians. They have the government invest taxpayer money, in some cases trillions of dollars, with them buying derivatives, buying financial instruments that they know are fraudulent. And on the way up, the big private central banks that are privately owned make trillions of dollars and then invest that in real assets. Then on the way down, when the nations start going bankrupt, the banks come back in with supposed bailout money and then offer to loan shark or to give people basically 30% interest on more money. And so what's happening is Europe wants Greece to fully go under. They want their islands, they want their infrastructure, they want full control over their country. Iceland, 2 weeks ago, passed a referendum saying, we don't owe this money, we don't owe this private debt, we're not going to do it. Greece is several months into riots and strikes, and the police and military and firemen have been joining them. And so, yes, globalization is in trouble at one level because it's being exposed as being predatory. But separately, in Europe and the United States, over $28 trillion in the last year and a half since the engineered financial crisis of the fall and winter of 2008, these banks have only gotten more power. And so now we see Gordon Brown and Herman von Rompuy, head of the EU, and Ban Ki-moon openly saying world government is here and that the banks are going to sign a world constitution amongst themselves. They brag that they're already in control of most of our nations, and they're going to take full control and start all these new carbon taxes and regulations. So globalization is not in trouble. It's just in trouble with the people as the people learn just how corrupt and criminal this system is.
Well, that's what I think. It's pretty interesting to see the reactions of some of the different countries in the European Union. Clearly, not such a union right now. You know, hearing different things from Spain and France and Germany, their reaction to how to best deal with this. Some saying that any sort of bailout should be a very last resort. But I want to talk with you about sort of what's happening in the European Union. Compare it to what's going on in America in terms of globalization.
Well, okay, let's look at Europe first and the Mediterranean. You have the original 10 members, then 15 members, and now more than 20 members, expanding out potentially to over 40. And we have the internal EU documents from 1957 with the Treaty of Rome, where they talked about setting it up by stealth as a way to financially conquer Eastern Europe and the Mediterranean by stealth. So where Hitler failed to do it militarily, they said, we will do it by stealth. So what you're seeing is Western Europe waging war on Greece and the old world. And so Greece is right where they want them. They don't want to give Greece more loans now because they've already maxed them out. They've already created a debt ratio so high that the private financial interest basically own that country through fraud. Versus the U.S., we were more of a free market, a much more wealthy nation, had more industrial capacity, more farming and agrarian capacity. We weren't a one-crop economy like Greece with tourism. And so we haven't gone as far down the line yet. In the next 5 to 10 years, they will fully, and perhaps even sooner, fully bankrupt the United States and Western Europe. But this is done in a process. First, the IMF and World Bank raided the third world. Now they're raiding Asia and the old world. They raided Russia in the early 1990s, but then were kicked out to a certain extent. And so what's happening is you have these global interests moving around the world like a group of vultures, basically plucking the eyes out of once free nations. But they are in trouble because the population, not just in Europe, not just in Asia, not just in the Mediterranean, but here in the United States and North America, more than ever realize that the private banking cartels are nothing but Ponzi scheme criminals, and more people are identifying them. We've passed it in the House, it's now in the Senate, to audit the private Federal Reserve. And so there's a real battle going on globally against these oligarchs.
I'm curious to get your perspective on this. I mean, you brought up some historical examples from before, and we saw the IMF and the WTO, lending money to countries, you call them the third world, I know, Central American countries, back, 50 years ago, loaning them money and not really ever getting it paid back. So we go into things like loan forgiveness. I mean, do you think that that's something that we'll see in the future?
Sure. But again, we have the internal IMF World Bank documents, 2002, Joseph Stiglitz, Greg Palast, and we've gotten other documents from them. When you hear about loan forgiveness, let's take the case of Nigeria. In the 60s, they took a $1.3 billion loan. They've now paid over $50 billion just in interest on that and still owe over $50 billion. So they'll end up paying over $100 billion on $1.3 billion. And so the agreements are that money that's given to Nigeria or Argentina or Russia or any other country, they then have to agree to spend the money with globalist corporations that are already subsidiaries of the banks. So the banks take Western taxpayer money, they give it to the third world at loan sharking rates. Then they agree to basically never pay it back and to only spend the money with corporations that are already part of this cabal. And then once they fully bankrupted the nations, they come in with debt forgiveness if the government accepts the new policies of austerity, if the bauxite mines, the gold mines, the timber, the population, the water supplies are turned over to the IMF and World Bank, and which themselves are private holding companies similar to the private Federal Reserve. And so this is pure piracy, absolute mercantile, private corporate imperialism.
All right, Alex Jones, thanks so much, as always, for that perspective.